Okay, this is Thomas Delaware's video on the most unhealthy places in America and what they eat, and I'm quite interested to see this.
A minute. Doesn't mean that I don't like you, doesn't mean that I don't like where you live, but I have to pick on you because there was a pretty big study that took a look at over 18,000 people. They gave me a lot of data, so I hate having to do this, but I gotta pick this region apart.
I popped a link down below.
This is all in America. So basically, I heard someone say once that America is kind of like the United States of poison, which is quite funny.
In Nutritional Sciences had published a paper, again, took a look at 18,080 people, a big analysis, and it was looking at different regions in terms of diet and what people generally ate to try to determine which region had the worst diet when it came down to cognitive function. Now, if we understand how cognitive function plays a role, not just with cognitively how we feel, but just that central feeling of how our bodies feel too, then yeah, it might make sense that...
Yeah, I do think it makes sense, because if a diet is very good for your cognitive, for your brain's thinking, then it's probably also very good for your whole health as a whole. Everybody actually acts like... if something is good for one thing, it doesn't mean it's good for health or something else. Like they'd say, oh, just because you eat protein and you feel better, you make more muscle at the gym, doesn't mean it's going to make you live a long life. When that's not really true, because the diet which makes you optimal, as in like make the biggest thinking skills, like the fastest sleep times, like feeling refreshed, stuff like that, just feeling good in general, is what's going to be better for you in your health, because it also means that clearly your body's not trying to like detoxify from those other things. I remember when I really started eating red meat instead of like regular meat, like chicken and stuff, I slept a lot easier. Like I only slept for like 8 hours instead of 10. And that's because red meat is a more pure type of meat than chicken, because of like I was eating like conventional chicken, like you get at the grocery store, and so it has like less toxins, and so your overall work better, so you'll be living a better life.
The diet that is probably the worst for the body is also probably the worst for the brain. But anyhow, unfortunately, it's the Southern diet. Now, in this Journal of Nutritional Science study broke...
I mean, you said that like a lot easier than I did. I took a lot longer.
There was a lot of vegetable oils, a lot of like canola, a lot of soybean oil, a lot of saturated fat, a lot of fried foods, but most of all, a lot of hyper-palatable processed food. Now, I'm going to talk about what the study illuminated first, and then I'll kind of give my insights into it, because I mean,
yeah, basically everyone eats ultra-processed foods nowadays, which is crazy. It is actually crazy, if you think about it. It is crazy to put something, if you saw the origins of it, if you saw how it was made in the lab, all the ingredients they got together and everything, it would be crazy to put that in your mouth, yet everyone does it.
I do think that a Southern diet can be manipulated to not be so bad by simply changing a few things. So this video isn't just to pick on you. This video is to say, okay, here's what is seen as a cognitively like terrible diet. What can we change within it? So they found there was lower verbal...
That just reminded me, the cognitive diet, bro. I had this friend that was a girl in my class, which studied day and night. She's literally, and she really cared about her studies. But she kept on having a little bit of like mishaps. Like she would just randomly get like a low grade and get really sad. She was like fucking suicidal and everything about that. It was like the most important thing in her life. And her diet was horrible, and her sleep was horrible. And she didn't even end up getting the grades she wanted for the class I was in. And I did like all right, even though I didn't study at all, like literally nothing. Just because if you eat good and sleep well, you're getting like the good amount of cognitive function you need. If you study, of course, it's gonna fucking help, because you're gonna remember the things that come out on the test. But if you study with a shit diet, you're gonna get like a very like slight boost than someone who has a good diet that doesn't study like at all, literally. Just because of like the brain thinking skills, like a lot of the questions on the exams are more attributed to how well does your brain think, and the common sense type questions, rather than did you remember like what was said in the class.
Memory and lower executive function within the Southern diet. Okay, well, those are both two very important things. Okay, so executive function is like the prefrontal cortex, like frontal lobe, like override for everything. Okay, so if that executive function is lower, then a lot of other functions can be lower too, our ability to logically think through things. But what we have to do is we can't just take a large observational study like this and understand mechanisms. So with that, we turn to the rats. So now you probably understand how science kind of works a little bit. Like we see big things, and then we start looking at mechanisms in vitro, in petri dishes, and then we look in rats. There was a study done in rats that was published in the journal Hippocampus that looked at these kinds of foods, these processed foods, these saturated fats, these fried foods, characteristically a Southern style diet. And they put these rats for 8 months on this diet. Okay, and they found long-term potentiation as well as a reduction in BDNF. All of that is gobbledygook. What that simply means is that there was less overall function.
Yeah, it is gobbledygook or whatever he said, because like why, like who even gives a shit about this, bro? Like the way you find out a good diet is you think about what your ancestors probably ate based on like the region, like your genetics or whatever. And it's basically the same for like most people. It's just, you know, meat, fruit, honey, milk, maybe not even milk. But you know, just stuff like that. Like a mostly meat and fruit diet works pretty well. That's like what we've been eating. They didn't eat vegetables, seeing as most vegetables don't even exist like in nature. Like they just don't. Like broccoli was invented in 1950 something. Literally, it was made, it was cultivated. So it's not even fully natural, really. Not that I think that's a super bad thing, because it's still like man-made, but made like through natural processes. So I don't think it's that bad. Not that I would eat broccoli, obviously, but like I think like with the fruit it's also fine. But just think about what they ate, and that's like the first basis, right? That's like the most important thing. Then you can think about like, oh, what this number when a BMM is low, then that means that it's bad. Like it's not really as important as like principles, right?
Of the brain cells. Basically, the neurons were not able to effectively send their signals as well. So when we talk about a decrease in spatial learning, that is a decrease in the brain being able to create sort of a mental image of the environment that you're in. So with rats, they were using a maze. These rats could not navigate the maze as well when they were eating 8 months of a Southern style diet or heavily processed diet that is characteristic.
Bro, but what is even a rat's natural diet? Because if you compare a rat's diet to a human's diet, then how can you even think that these two, like the different diets, are going to affect the same way
of a Southern diet? So we have these series of neurons, a series of cells that communicate with one another.
I mean, obviously, just doing the best you can.
Dendritic spine density. Essentially, what's happening is you're having less branches, if you want to call it that reach out and collect signals from other neurons. So the neurons, our brain is a bunch of neurons sending signals down axons that communicate with dendrites. So basically, it's a bunch of branches that send electrical signals. Okay. Well, if these electrical signals can't get to their destination, then brain function is going to go down, right? So in this particular case, when there was less spine density or dendritic density, that means there were less branches able to receive a signal, which explains why executive function might go down in some other studies, because it's all kind of connected there. Now, when we look at long-term potentiation, that's interesting because long-term potentiation is like the solidifying of those pathways.
I'm going to skip this part of the video. I like genuinely.
Now, okay, well, I could pick apart this diet more and go into kind of the waistline studies and all this and that, but I don't need to beat it into the ground too much more. Let's talk about what we can change. Okay, from a hyperpalatability standpoint, this is something that's very important. Things that are fatty and things that are sweet are going to satisfy our brain in different.
This is what I don't actually like. I heard from a YouTuber called I Am Lucid a long time ago about how to lose weight. This was when I was really, really fat. And he said it's like you don't want to eat fatty or sweet foods. And back then that seemed normal to me because I didn't know like anything in the fitness space. But now that I do, it's kind of impossible to see it this way, because fatty and sweet foods are, you have to have like one of them or probably both of them, right? How are you going to eat foods that aren't fatty or sweet? So you're only going to eat protein? Because if it has sugar, or carbs in any way, then it's sweet. If it has fat in any way, then it's fatty. So the only thing that's left is protein. So are you going to eat no carbs and no protein, unless he counts sweet as different from starches? Because like starches are carbs, but they're not sweet. Even though they're the exact same in the body, like there's no point even changing that. And they're probably worse. I've heard that they like make insulin like higher to digest them, and also it's just like harder to break down. So it's like, why are fatty foods bad when fat is one of the three macronutrients, like one of the big three: carbs, protein, and fats. They're important for hormone health as well. I'm sure this guy doesn't think fat is bad because he's literally a fat channel. He's a keto. He did like keto a long time ago, where it's basically like the fat diet where you eat a lot of fat and protein. So how are foods that are fatty bad?
Different ways, period. Okay. when we have these big surges in dopamine, we can effectively burn out our dopamine receptors. I don't want to say literally.
And obviously, if it's sweet like a donut, it's bad. But if it's sweet like in honey or milk or fruit, then why would it be bad? It's still like a natural food. Don't think about the individual thing. Don't think about, oh, it has sugar. Think about what it is as a whole. Oh, it's a fruit. Yeah, my ancestors probably ate this. It was probably around in some shape or form.
Burnout, but you can really desensitize them, which means that you need more and more and more of something to do the same job. So something that's hyperpalatable, of course, is going to increase cravings, not just from a blood sugar response, but as far as our dopamine response is concerned too.
Or maybe it doesn't even have to be about ancestors. It could also be like 500 years ago or like 100 years ago. It could literally be like your great-grandparents. They probably ate fruit, and there wasn't like obesity or heart attacks back then. So it's not even like a big thing.
Solved by prioritizing protein first. So hyperpalatability, above all, protein first. That just solves that problem. Why? Because not only does protein satiate you, not only does protein help you in that category, but protein also attenuates the blood glucose response. Okay,
so basically this guy loves protein. I mean, that's kind of like the basic, that's like level 1. No one gives a shit about protein, bro. Protein is like the side effect. You get protein out of eating proper food. When you eat meat for the micronutrients and milk for the stuff it has as well, like the bacteria and stuff like that, you'll get enough protein. You don't have to think about the protein. Eggs as well, like, bro, you think about nutrients first, then protein, because who cares about protein?
More than that of fat.
You'll get it anyways.
Okay, so protein before your carbohydrates is pivotal. It's so critical to be able to attenuate that blood sugar response and maybe make it so you're not craving a bunch of other hyperpalatable stuff. Okay, now let's talk about fried foods for just a second. Where fried foods become a problem isn't so much the act of actually frying the food. It's two parts, okay? You have a higher glycemic refined flour, okay, which is already going to be a problem. There's already quite a bit of evidence showing that that's going to be hyperpalatable and not exactly good as far as insulin, as far as glucose, anyway.
It's like some junk added into it. And 2, the oils.
Want to avoid that. I'm not going to get into the gluten discussion, but that is something that's high glycemic and probably should be careful of. It's a process, right? Then what happens is you have a spike in insulin that happens from that, and you're putting this into a bunch of cruddy oil. So you're having a simultaneous ingestion of a high fat and high carbohydrates, refined and probably low quality oil.
The problem is refined. Okay, let's just make that clear. He's saying you're getting a mix of carbs and fats. I don't think that's bad for you whatsoever. Why? Because if you've ever seen grass-fed meats, so like grass-fed ribeye or grass-fed beef, there's always less fat than the grain-fed cows, because the grain-fed cows are fed like a more unnatural diet and they're fatter, right? So they, in the wild, in nature, and when we were cavemen or whatever, the fat on meat wasn't as much as it is today. Which means they probably wouldn't be able to fully pull off, I mean, surely they probably could, but not as optimally, a full-on like carnivore diet where they only eat meat and water. Like, that's what I used to kind of believe in for a while, but then when I realized that, or like a keto diet, when I realized that, you know, grass-fed meat, more natural meat, literally has less fat, it makes you think, oh, well, maybe we're not supposed to eat that much fat. Maybe we're supposed to eat a mix of all 3 macros, which is what I believe in. I don't think mixing carbs and fat is bad. I think that's like a new age thing, because your great-grandparents or great-great-great-grandparents wouldn't have cared at all about combining a steak, which has fat, with a banana. Because why? Because the banana is healthy, it's a fruit, and the steak is healthy, it's a meat. That's all you have to think about. You don't have to think about carbs or fat or butter with honey would be the worst thing, because honey is sugar and butter is fat. If you combine these two, you get diabetes. But it's not that simple, because it's more so to do with the food quality. Honey, if it's raw and organic, it doesn't even really have to be raw, honestly. I mean, it kind of does it's a mix, right? But you're not going to get like bad health issues from that. It's honey, it's healthy. You're not going to get bad health issues from butter, it's healthy. So if you mix them together, it's fine. But the oils is a problem.
Okay, so the first thing that you do with that is if you can make simple changes by swapping out the kind of flours that you would bread things with to things like maybe hazelnut flour, maybe almond flour, maybe even blanched almond meal, things like cassava or tiger.
I've seen some people that use like tallow for these kinds of things, which tallow, by the way, is like a butter, but for beef, like it's beef fat. And that would be ideal for sure, because tallow has like that kind of similar kind of flour texture in a way. I've seen people make like tallow bread and shit. And it's not bad for you, tallow is actually one of the best fats you can have.
Nut flour or arrowroot flour, they are what are called resistant starches. So they break down differently.
Seeing as it literally comes from meat, so
they're resistant. So what that means is that since they're resistant, they don't absorb the same way that regular flour does, but they still fry up like flour. I actually have made like paleo-style chicken breast and paleo-style fish tacos with cassava and arrowroot and tapioca starch. So really cool stuff to use there if you're going to be frying. Now the oils that you want to fry in, this is where we run into another problem. Okay, there's some preliminary evidence that's been done in mice that was taking a look at hypothalamic gene expression, and it did demonstrate that the soybean oils and the canola oils could be playing a role in neuroinflammation. Again, it's done in rodent.
Okay, yeah, it's done in rodent studies. He's about to say, yeah, okay, but everybody fucking knows this. You don't have to get an oil that was made to, you know, engine lubricant. You probably already heard of that. I'm not gonna go too deep into it, but and then also that it cleans cars well. Like I saw a video of people like clean the cars well, because it's literally bleached and deodorized before you have it. How is that in any way going to need a study to prove it's healthy? And by the way, there are studies that prove it's healthy.
Models, but we do know overall that if you have a lot of omega-6 fats from low-quality oils like soybean oil and from canola oil, and you don't have a lot of omega-3s to balance it out, that
even if you do have omega-3s to balance it out, bro, this shit is just toxic. The seed oils, if you look back at anything that's an oil that isn't olive or avocado or coconut oil, it's fucking toxic. It's just bad. If it's like sunflower, safflower, there's a bazillion names for it, or like palm oil as well is fine, I think. I'm not 100% sure actually, but any seed oil, you can like probably look up a list of them. They're all deodorized, bleached, refined, oxidized, whatever the words are. They're just not good. They're just not good. In your body, they store up. It's what gives people the fat effect. You know, the people who can't seem to lose weight no matter what they do, and they're eating salads every day and they're not losing weight, and you're like, what the fuck is going on with these people? And I used to be kind of like that. My metabolism was super crashed, and my mom is like that, and it's nothing to do with anything else really other than your upbringing, and of course how much of these polyunsaturated fats, linoleic acid, seed oils, they're all like basically linked, you've been consuming or you have inside of your body, because that's what really messes you up.
It could be an inflammatory situation. Omega-6 and omega-3.
It gets kind of like clogged up in your cells, I've heard. I'm not sure of that, obviously. I'm not like a scientist, but I do have some experience with it, because when I cut them out, I felt a lot better. So I know that what I'm saying is true.
Ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s, that's when you have a problem, okay? So these things that are called pro-inflammatory mediators are very important to pay attention to. So it's not a very difficult switch to be able to say, I'm gonna ditch the soybean oil, and if I fry some food at home, I'm going to fry in avocado oil, which has a high heat, right? Or high heat tolerance. It can deal with high heat before it reaches its smoke point. So you can fry in things like avocado oil. Now, another thing that you want to look at is possibly suet. Okay, suet is a form of lard that is predominantly stearic acid. I don't want to get into the super nitty-gritty, but stearic acid is a saturated fat that has been correlated with much better biomarkers than, say, palmitic or even myristic, other kinds of saturated fats. So you don't want to be using the shortening, you don't want to be using the margarine, you don't want to be using the canola, soybean oil. Go for the avocado oil, go for the oils like, and the fats like the suet, occasionally even tallow, better quality that even if they're saturated fat, have a better profile of suet and stearic acid, which is just overall better fat.
I don't think saturated fat is bad at all, and obviously, yeah, tallow is really good, and all of those other things are good too.
And then with the sweet
lard is not really ideal, you know, it's still like an animal fat, so it's like kind of alright, but it's not ideal just because pigs are monogastric, which means that they store their toxins in their fat.
sweeteners, this is a pretty basic one. The funny thing is, there was a study that was published in the British Journal of Nutrition, I'll just paraphrase it here. Took a look at over 800 people that were type 2 diabetics, and it did demonstrate that when you look at cognitive function with a sugary soft drink versus a diet soft drink, the sugary soft drink had a more negative effect than the diet soft drink. So, does that mean you should go pound a diet soda? No. But if you had to look at diet soda versus regular soda and the overall markers on metabolic health, not just microbiome, probably would lean towards the diet soda. But now we're in a situation where we have a lot of other options like Zevias. And again, I'm not sponsored by them, but Zevias are stevia sweetened sodas that you can get, naturally sweetened, it's still 0 calorie. You want to be paying attention to these things because sugar has an effect on cognition, high fructose corn syrup has an effect on cognition, okay? Protein has an effect on cognition in a good way, fats have an effect on cognition. And another thing that you can simply start to do when it comes down to like neuroinflammation, overall things like that, reduce the alcohol consumption as well.
I wonder what type of fat has an effect on cognitive. He just said basically that fat has a bad effect on your brain, I'm pretty sure he said. He didn't say it was like a positive one like he said for protein. before we said fatty foods were bad. Well, so what type of fat? Because there's different types of fat. There's polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, saturated, and saturated fats are only good for your brain, seeing as that's actually what your brain is made of. If you ate a actual cow brain or a brain of basically any animal, it's made of saturated fat. You can see in the macros. You can like look it up, and that means that animals have saturated fat brains, which means you need saturated fat in your brain.
Well, I've talked about this in other videos, but
to make it better.
Alcohol can play a huge role in how our brain functions.
I might be wrong with that. I'm not 100% sure. I could look it up right now. I'm not going to, but obviously looking it up isn't even like a proper way of fucking validating things anyways. There's like doctors that talk about this. I'm not like one of those people, but what I do know is that I grew up eating a very low saturated fat diet, and I was definitely very behind on my in my brain, in my school, in my education. And I do think it would have been better if I would have been eating the way I'm eating now, just because of how much better not only do I feel, but just the things I know. It's just, it has to be better. If you grew up eating grains, pasta, rice, bread, only those things, then you'll know what I mean. You know, like, everyone used to grow tall and grow beards, and I literally just stayed developmentally stuck because of these fucking foods. And the right things to eat are what I propose, because everything else has a problem with it. Everything else doesn't have the actual fire, doesn't have the actual fuel. The actual fuel is saturated fat. That's what grows your brain. That's what gives you hormones. That's what gives you testosterone. Why? Because that's what makes cholesterol. That's what helps in the testosterone thing. This is all actually validly backed up by science, like properly, like even the regular ass doctors would admit it. Even though they would say, oh no, but it's still bad because of heart attacks or whatever. They do have to admit cholesterol makes testosterone. Okay, why are we trying to make cholesterol the lowest possible? Makes no fucking sense. But they'd say, well, dying of a heart attack is more important than, less important than testosterone, whatever. Anyways, you get what I mean.